China is planning to spend more on its military, a total of 1.9 trillion yuan or 276 billion US dollars. That's 7% more than last year. Even though it's the smallest increase since 2021, it's still higher than the broader GDP growth forecast, which is 4.5 to 5% for the Chinese economy. And these are just the public numbers. The actual figures are thought to be higher. So why is China doing this, and where is this money going to be spent exactly?
Is very much targeted on reunification with Taiwan.
That's Professor Stephen Nagy, an expert on Asia-Pacific politics and security issues.
Preventing Taiwan from declaring independence and preventing interference from abroad.
Beijing sees the island as a renegade province, and reunification with Taiwan has been a long-term goal of the ruling Chinese Communist Party.
台湾自古以来就是中国的领土，过去、现在和将来都绝无可能成为什么国家。
So far, Beijing's strategy has focused on the threat of force instead of the actual use of force. But it's already preparing for how the US might respond, including a possible superpower military confrontation over Taiwan. China's People's Liberation Army, the PLA, is also continuing to draw lessons from the war in Ukraine and now the war in Iran. And they will also be examining how Chinese military equipment sold to Pakistan performed in the country's most recent conflict with India over Kashmir.
I think there's a real sense that they need to continue to build up their capacities and build up their modern technologies to deal with the reality of a much more superior US military.
To do that, China has laid out a roadmap for military modernization in its spending.
按照国防和军队现代化新3步走战略，推进机械化、信息化、智能化融合发展。
Although Beijing isn't very transparent about what technology they are exactly spending money on, experts say there's a global trend that China is likely to follow.
The Chinese are astute learners of war. In light of the second war on Iran by the United States, what we've seen is, I think, a whole new level of how AI and autonomous systems have been used to deploy missile systems to destroy Iran's defensive systems. I think China may use its own autonomous systems to do something similar if it was to engage in a kinetic conflict across the Taiwan Straits.
Beijing has already shown off some of these new technologies last year during its military parade that marks the victory over Japan in World War II. They rolled out a number of unmanned land and sea vehicles, displayed underwater and aerial drones, and even took some robotic wolves for a walk.
They've watched what's happened with how the Ukrainians have successfully defended their country against the Russians. And I think that they've understood that drones are the new part of modern warfare, and they're going to invest heavily in this.
Last year's parade also showed off Beijing's wide range of missiles and advanced aircraft. This will likely continue to take up a big part of China's defense budget.
We know that they're going to spend on, for example, boosting their naval assets. We know they're going to boost their aerospace and missile systems because they believe this is the best way to keep America away.
These include intercontinental ballistic missiles like this one that can reach the US mainland from its launch site in China. Beijing is also thought to have developed other ICBMs that can even carry multiple warheads. Let's not forget that one warhead can already kill hundreds of thousands of people, so these will be highly destructive weapons. And naval assets will also probably continue to be a top spending priority. Beijing is building nuclear-powered and armed submarines faster than ever, according to the International Institute for Strategic Studies. These submarines are an important part of the country's expanding nuclear deterrence, because they ensure that even if its land-based weapons get taken out, they've still got the means to hit back with nukes. Officially, China has a no first-use nuclear policy, but that doesn't keep them from building up their nuclear arsenal. A study published last year estimates that China now has at least 600 nuclear warheads. Although that's still far from the totals Russia and the US have, it's growing faster than any other countries. All this means China has been investing and will continue to invest in a variety of nuclear weapons that can be deployed on land, at sea, and in the air.
I think that there is an emotional assessment within the security planners in China that if there was a confrontation between the United States and China across the Taiwan Straits, that the United States would deploy tactical nuclear weapons in that conflict. This is why they're investing in ramping up their production and refinement of their nuclear deterrent to prevent the United States from using these kinds of weapons in a conflict zone.
But that doesn't mean Taiwan is facing an imminent attack from the PLA. Experts say that China is still trying to avoid the use of force.
I think as we look at Chinese rhetoric and we look at its behavior, it clearly wants to use coercion and economic inducements to pull Taiwan into the mainland peacefully. A kinetic conflict, as I mentioned, would have extremely negative consequences for the region's economy and unpredictable consequences for the one-party state.
And as much as Beijing is flexing its muscles, it's not likely that it will actually use its military might in a global conflict.
We're certainly not seeing China engage in a large-scale conflict in the same way that we've seen the United States over the past year in Iran or Venezuela. It's not about expeditionary forces like the United States has.
Any military move against Taiwan would cause major disruption to trade. And China has its own problem to take care of: corruption, including in the military. And that might take up part of the budget too.
We know the long-term trends is that there's always an interest in boosting the wages and the conditions of the PLA officers, because this has a dual effect of making it more attractive for ordinary Chinese to join the PLA. But more importantly, it prevents corruption from emerging when you pay your workers a little bit better.
The US is still the world's biggest military spender, but China is catching up. What Beijing decides to do or not to do with all those additional military capabilities it's buying might be one of the biggest questions out there.